So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being with us. I want to begin our conversation this evening by acknowledging that while we're gathering online, that Holy Blossom Temple is situated on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples. This land is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples. As our community commits to taking up the 94 actions, an effort to seeking truth and reconciliation with the Indigenous peoples of this land, I call to mind the powerful and the truthful words of Professor David S. Kaufman, who teaches how the Jewish people have contributed to Indigenous displacement as they have sought to make Canada their home, and the Jewish people have fought against Indigenous disenfranchisement while seeking to make Canada a better home. So this is our truth. So let us all work towards the betterment of this good nation and the equality of all of its peoples. And in the spirit of making our world a more understanding, a more compassionate place, in the spring of 2019, a group of Holy Blossom Temple congregants, professional staff, clergy, met to establish the Luke Sklar Mental Health Initiative as a tribute to this much loved member of our community who died by suicide in May of 2018. So the mission of this initiative is to provide education, support, and resources related to the challenges of living with or supporting someone with a mental illness. And we believe that by talking about and supporting mental health, this initiative will work toward ending the stigma around mental illness and encourage others to seek help. So while navigating COVID protocols might not necessarily feel like a mental health issue, the ways in which we emotionally and psychologically cope with these new rules is very much a matter of mental health and mental wellness and well-being. The focus of our conversation tonight should not be about understanding the current protocols at Holy Blossom Temple or any other local synagogue, but rather how we personally and collectively navigate situations, decisions that we're now being faced with. So should you want to learn more about Holy Blossom's COVID safety protocols, you can find the regularly updated information sheet on the front page of the Holy Blossom website. In just a moment, I'll post that link in the chat box as well. And so when we reach the Q&A section of our panel this evening, I'll just encourage everyone to, rather than asking specific questions about any given particular case, to think about this in a broader sense and to not ask any specific place questions. A matter of housekeeping as well. If you would like to submit a question for the panel, you can see that you have chat options to either Sherry Wilson or Tabitha Grove, and they will be collecting the questions that come in and communicating with Pam Hamovich, who is leading our panel today. So I want to extend my gratitude to each of you who have taken the time to join us either live or by watching the recording, as well as to the members of the Luke Sklar Mental Health Initiative, not only for your role in organizing this evening, this panel tonight, but also for your gifts of sponsorship that made this evening possible. It's a real gift to the community, and so we thank you. Okay, so that's it on my end. I want to welcome on the screen with me as well, Pam Hamovich, who is going to set the frame for us this evening and introduce our panelists as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi Goodman, and shalom and welcome to all of you. My name is Pam Hamovich, and on behalf of the Luke Sklar Mental Health Initiative, we really want to thank you for joining us for tonight's program, Coping with the New Rules for COVID. Will you be coming to Seder? This is a very timely opportunity to ask our experienced panel just about anything. While official government restrictions have now lifted, we are facing increasing Omicron Omicron numbers, and our sixth wave. Many of us have questions and concerns. How do I navigate this ever-changing landscape? How can I be an advocate for my own health? How can I safely protect my unvaccinated children or aging immune-compromised parents? How do I help my adolescent to enjoy social time while still mitigating risk? If the last 2 years have taught us anything, it's that the answers to these questions and a host of others are not black or white, and they evoke different feelings in different people. Our panel tonight will help us to navigate these new rules and address your concerns. Rabbi Goodman just covered some housekeeping. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to add that following this evening's program, all participants will be receiving by email a complete list of resources to build on many of the areas that we'll be covering this evening. These resources were submitted by our panelists and the Luke Sklar Mental Health Initiative Committee. We trust that you'll find these helpful and valuable, and you feel free to share them. As well, these resources will be accompanied tomorrow by a very, very short survey, which we ask that you complete and return to us. The reason is we just want to hear from you, and we really welcome your comments. Okay, so now it's my pleasure to introduce to you our three exceptional panelists. We're so excited to have them all with us tonight. And in an effort to really maximize our time with them tonight and address your questions, I'm going to introduce them by way of a more abridged version and encourage you to read their very extensive bios on the Holy Blossom Temple website. So first, from A to Z, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Andrew Morris. Is Dr. Morris on the screen? There he is. Hi, Dr. Morris. Can we unmute? There, okay.
Yep.
Dr.
I think we
Morris,
were playing
yes.
tag there. Yeah.
Okay, good. Is the professor of medicine at the University of Toronto and the medical director of the Sinai Health System University Health Network Antimicrobial Stewardship Program. That's a mouthful. He is widely sought as a speaker and consultant and is the author of over 100 peer-reviewed publications. Many of you may be familiar with his bi-weekly wonderful newsletter that he just finished writing for the last 2 years. We particularly enjoyed all the videos in those publications as well. So welcome, Dr. Morris, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I'd also like to welcome tonight Dr. Alan Bardikoff. Dr. Bardikoff has been a registered psychologist since 1989. He is currently in private practice, but before that worked in both hospitals and community agencies treating anxiety, depression, and other emotional and behavioral disorders in both adolescents and adults. Alan and his family are both longtime members of Holy Blossom Temple. Welcome, Alan. And as I said, from A to Z, Zoe Levitt has a master's degree in social work. She has spent her 30-year career helping older people and their families, both in hospitals and in their homes. She has a private practice where she provides counseling to clients who may be struggling with loss, depression, illness, memory challenges, and isolation. And as well, she helps her clients navigate the healthcare system and access community services. So welcome to all of you. It's great to have you here. So without further ado, it's time to chat. So let me start the conversation by asking each of you to very briefly sum up. I know that's hard when I say briefly, the last 2 years as you have seen them through your professional lenses, and what you think has been the greatest fallout from COVID. So if we could start with you, Zoe.
Oh, sure. As you say, it's a big question, and I think we could talk. I could talk about this for 20 years, but to highlight some of the issues that I've seen as a social worker and that I've read about. I mean, I think seniors have really had a bad rap. I'll just start off by saying that we know that that almost 3,800 people seniors died in long-term care. That's bad. We also know that there's been an increase of administration of psychotropic drugs for seniors, more so than ever before, because of depression and anxiety. Not the greatest way to treat these problems. And I think, you know, we society has also seen increase in worsening cognitive problems, worsening cognitive impairment, falls, decreased functional capacities, and an increase in depression and anxiety and feelings of hopelessness. So that I guess would just be a summary of my interpretation.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Dr. Morris, your thoughts?
Agreed. I could go on for a very long time.
Of course.
I think
just a way to get us started.
Of course, yeah. You know, I think the greatest highlight I would point out is that the scientific advances and the speed of science that has occurred over the past 2+ years has been breathtaking and really quite remarkable. Unfortunately, it's been countered by, I think, two things in particular. One is anti-science. And I think the anti-science and then both misinformation and disinformation has really taken away many of the gains that we have. And I would say the other thing that has really been a challenge has been the, and part of it is what was just mentioned before about, you know, older adults, but I would say in general, which we, you know, it's not new, but I think it really shone a light on the vulnerable members of our population and how disproportionately they were affected. It's not only older adults, but it's young kids, it's people with from low socioeconomic statuses, as well as other vulnerable, including racialized communities. And I think that those two tensions, the inability to make major strides with the vulnerable communities and effectively battling anti-science has been what has taken away what we probably could have, in a large way, massively gained from all the scientific advances that we made over that time.
Okay, lots to think about there and lots to talk about later. Thank you. And Dr. Bartikoff, just.
Thank you, Pam. I guess the way I would start is to say the past 2 years have been this for me. I've been sitting in front of a screen, talking to people who I would usually see in my office, and have jokingly spent too much time in my basement office. The reality is that this disruption has really been significant, I'll just say in all of our lives, in particular because I see a lot of kids, a lot of university students, as well as high school students and younger. I'll say that some of the things that I've noticed or that they've spoken about as being so challenging has been the uncertainty as to what has happened to us and what does this mean. Certainly for many as well, the disrupted routines and schedules that they've had to incorporate into their lives. So the reality is, well, many of us could predict how our days would go. Things have changed. What has also happened has been a growth of fear. And while all of us can recognize that we rarely want to encourage fear, especially within children, reality has been over the past couple of years that we've spoken about fearful, frightening things that have been meant to change our behavior. And that's been difficult because suddenly, I won't say so suddenly, but rather as we start to consider the fact that COVID may be changing and that our lives may emerge in some ways, we're now telling people not to be afraid, which that kind of dichotomy between be afraid and don't be afraid is certainly head spinning for us as adults and certainly for children and adolescents as well. What I'd say is that notion of too much information, as Dr. Morris was mentioning, not too much information, sorry, rapidly changing information, and certainly at the beginning of things, the inability to escape information, all of these things have really resulted, for my practice, in an increase in anxiety and in fear and worry that have been, I'll just say, endemic. And so for me in my work, it's really been how can I respond and help people manage something that's more than difficult to manage itself.
Okay, well, there's no question that the landscape has continuously been changing, and especially since we invited the three of you to be here tonight, we are now experiencing what we're hearing as a sixth wave. Today, Ontario reported an estimated 100,000 new cases or infections. And as you're referring to, all of you, about the anxiety, at the same time, we're hearing that masks are no longer mandated and public spaces are opening. So you're right, this is where we want to start our conversation, because there is so much more uncertainty, confusion, and of course, a tremendous amount of anxiety. So let's start getting to the questions, because there are a lot coming in. And there are a lot of anxious people out there. So can I start with you, Dr. Morris? As just stated, and as you very clearly stated right from the outset, there has been a lot of confusion and anxiety generated by the ever-changing messaging from our government. So you alluded to this, and I'm just wondering if you can talk about this a little bit more. How closely is our government listening to the health experts?
So I guess I'm going to primarily refer to the provincial government, the Ontario provincial
Sure.
government, in giving the answer. And I think that, first of all, the government's responsibility is to, take advice, and their primary point person for advice is Dr. Kieran Moore, who's the Chief Medical Officer of Health. As people may know, I'm a member of Ontario's Science Table. We're a volunteer table, and the government's under no has no requirement to listen to us. Although I will say that both Dr. Moore and the government have been in close contact with us throughout the pandemic, and often has listened to the advice. But their responsibility isn't just to listen to the science, but it's also to make decisions that they feel is overall in the best interests of the population. And even though we may not always agree with it, in fact, there are many times I've been rather public in disagreeing with it, but I do understand that they have a variety of tensions, including the fact that we have an election in approximately 2 months' time, and their primary goal is, it should be to govern and have a good government, a peace order and good government. But in fact, their primary responsibility is to get reelected. And I think all you got to do is watch the news or read the newspaper and see that the pandemic, by and large, has, perhaps except for the past few days, it's really fallen off the news cycle. And that's because it's gone into the backs of people's minds, and government's probably keen on that. So they do listen, but they listen only to a point. And I think most of us that we've definitely said very loudly and clearly, especially to them, especially through back channels and not only publicly, that things like mask mandates for a little bit longer would have been helpful. That hasn't been followed, but a lot of the other advice that we've been providing has been followed.
Okay, thank you for that. Now I'm going to just switch and ask you a little bit more specific question, because this is the type of question that's seems to be coming through on my chat here. This is from someone who just wrote, yesterday, her friend had dental work done. The dentist wore full PPE. Today, she heard that the dentist tested positive. What must she do now? Must she isolate, wear a mask, for how long? And when is the best time to do a rapid test when she can and when she considered herself safe from transmitting COVID. That's for you, Dr. Morris.
Yes. So I'm going to try and make it more general, first of all.
Yes, thank you.
You know, I think that probably everyone on this call has been or will be in close exposure to someone who has COVID. If they haven't already, you will. And, you know, almost certainly the absolute safest thing to do, which is not what we currently recommend, is to, you know, put yourself in isolation if you've been in prolonged close contact, or if it's short-term or rather intense contact, then, you know, to just monitor and perhaps, you know, get yourself tested. The one thing we know confidently is that just relying on symptoms isn't helpful enough to say that you are or not infected, right? And so, you know, how you decide to act on exposures not only is dependent on what your personal health is, but the other people who you interact with. So if you live with someone who's immunocompromised, you're probably going to deal with your exposure a little bit differently than if you have otherwise young and healthy people in the household with you who have no risks and are well vaccinated. The other thing I will point out is that exposure to someone who's infected but is wearing full PPE, and the truth is that most dental offices have actually gone even further and have HEPA filters in the rooms, which also reduces the risk additionally. All those things are going to make the exposure relatively low risk. And when you add the fact that most dentists, I'm not going to say all, but the majority of dentists are going to be well vaccinated, and if you're also well vaccinated, that makes the risk rather low. It's not zero for sure. You know, probably the best thing to do in most of those situations is just to play it cool and recognize that your overall risk of getting significantly ill is pretty low. And you probably have a higher risk of exposure if you're unmasked somewhere where there's just a lot of people indoors, then you're going to be in a dental office with a dentist who's wearing an N95 and probably a face shield on top of that.
Okay, thank you. Alan, I have a couple of questions for you. One is just to pick up on something in your introduction. You were talking about, you know, the impact for teens. So we know that over the last couple of years that even emergency visits for teens have risen. And the emotional fallout for them has been really quite significant. Their social lives, their home lives, and their academic lives have seen huge changes, as you refer to. Are there other issues around adolescents that we should be discussing going forward, or, you know, other things that you might want to tell us that would be helpful?
Perhaps what's difficult about the question is that I think that there are so many impacts on our young people, and the concerns that we see in hospitals, or that I would see in my office or other professionals in their offices, I suspect are just the tip of the iceberg. In terms of the ways in which isolation, removal from daily activities that often provided both comfort as well as validation, just think about the fact that people have been unable to really engage in those things that are so crucial for their purpose at that point in their lives. And so I have seen, and many of you would know, that there have been increases not only in these issues around emergency room visits, but eating disorders, mood disorders, anxiety disorders, as well as learning issues. Reality is that we often overlook these things. Well, sorry, we don't overlook them, but rather in the notion of speaking about mental health, students' education has been interrupted. And as many of the parents would recognize, their kids' progress may have been in some ways abruptly halted or slowed, though the expectations for them may remain the same. Many of the people that I spoke with in terms of just the opportunity to not have summer camp experiences or summer experiences, I'll just say social experiences, have also created situations where physical maturity hasn't necessarily kept, social maturity hasn't kept with physical maturity and age. And these kinds of things continue to be issues for families, certainly for kids, some of whom know that this is their case and that they recognize that they have missed out on things. In some odd ways, I've had some kids who say, you know, the opportunity to go online has actually been wonderful for me. That's how things started, right? The notion of perhaps not having to worry so much about some of the social pressures at school, perhaps having the opportunity to do more online work, which seemed to relieve some of the school challenges, though that quickly dissipated. And people, just about everyone I speak to recognizes the frustration of not being able to do things the way they're supposed to do. So I will say that from my experience as well, I've recognized that for students ending high school and students beginning university, the experience has been severely compromised. For me, perhaps for many of the other people listening today, these were really formative years. And I do have concerns about the ways in which the limited opportunities that people have had to deal with, or the disappointments at not getting what they anticipated in these experiences, what the impact of these losses will be. That's probably what I would say defines things the most, which is that we are really talking about loss. Despite the fact that many of us have pivoted, big word these days, right? Pivoted, but the notion that we have all tried to respond nonetheless doesn't only camouflages, it doesn't negate the fact that there are real serious losses, which many elements of the population have experienced.
Okay, thank you for that. And now we'll go to the other end of the age spectrum and have a couple of questions for you, Zoe. Sure. Seniors have really been hit hard, as you say, throughout the pandemic. You even mentioned a number in terms of deaths. COVID-19 brought our attention to many deficits in long-term and elderly care. Can you speak about some of these issues that came to light?
Yeah, so many deficits. And I just want to start off by saying that these deficits that we're all publicly aware of now is not because of COVID. These are long-standing existing deficits in long-term care, both in institutional care and in the provision of community-based care as well. So it's really important that we all know that it's not this evil COVID that has caused these problems. It's this COVID that has brought out and has highlighted the deficit. So just wanted to mention that. I think it's really important. I mean, if we talk about deficits, well, we've learned that that PSWs work can, prior to COVID, were able to go from one long-term care facility to another. Our current government decided to legislate that wasn't allowed for obvious reasons. And I just read yesterday that as of March 14th, and this is devastating for me to read this, as of March 14th, the government revoked that legislation, and PSWs can now move from one long-term care facility to another. So that was pretty devastating to hear. So that's one deficit. You know, other deficits are you know, poor PSWs are poorly paid. We don't have enough PSWs in long-term care to start off with. There's no mandatory legislation that in each facility there should be, say, one PSW to 4 residents. So it could be one PSW to 15 residents in one place, one PSW to 10, one PSW to 18. So that's a deficit as well. I know that the government has said that they're going to be changing that and adding more PSWs to the system, but that's not going to happen for many years to come. another deficit is that as soon as this present government was elected, one of the first things they did is that they eliminated on-site quality assessments. They eliminated them in person. So what ended up happening is that people would, these investigators would make a couple of phone calls and ask and perform their quality assessments by phone. Well, we know that that's not the way to do this. So that was another significant deficit. They were slow in bringing in PPEs, and it's all about ageism. People in long-term care, whether you're in an institution or whether you're in the community, we have to remember that most people are, well, I guess we're talking about institutions. The average age of someone in an institution is about 86, 87. Most of these people have significant dementia. Many of them are women. So none of these people are voters. So, it's kind of easy to, that I might be getting a bit political here, but it's easy to bypass this whole group of people. I think maybe I'll stop there. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay, well, yes, those were many issues that did come to light. This is a question that came in by a registrant. So this is for you, Zoe, as well. How do families best handle two sets of grandparents when each set has a very different perspective on risk management? Any suggestions for handling these difficult situations, which seem to end up more about fairness rather than safety?
It's a really tough decision. As Alan said at the very beginning, when he was talking, it's about fear, and fear can be overwhelming. And sometimes fear, if we let it go out of perspective, it can inhibit our ability to be able to problem solve in any sort of informed way. So that's a really good question. I guess because I'm a social worker, I would suggest that the two sets of grandparents get together and talk about what their fears are. That's the first thing that I would recommend, and see if there are any compromises that can be made, and hopefully that can help. I've also included for participants here a risk assessment tool, a COVID risk assessment tool that you can use. And that's a tool that takes about 10 or 15 minutes. You answer a whole bunch of questions, and it will then tell you whether what your risk assessment level of risk is, whether it's mild, medium, or you really are at risk. So I would encourage you to even use that tool to start off with. And, and then compromise. So for example, the Seder is 2 nights. So maybe if a resolution or a compromise can't be met, maybe one set of grandparents can meet with the family for 1 night, and another set of grandparents can meet on the second night. Another set of compromises is making sure that everyone masks, asking that people wear masks in the home. Of course, you can't wear a mask when you're eating, but to reduce that level of risk as much as possible, maybe have a window that's opened a little bit so that there's air circulating. Maybe even wear a jacket inside. A little bit uncomfortable, but at least that might provide lesser amount of fear. So, and then if you can't figure it out, get help to work it through.
So Pam, I wonder if I can jump in just on that.
Yes.
And Zoe, I'm not sure if you had any interactions in your practice, with, but certainly at the beginning of COVID, so I'll say a year and a half ago, I did have a number of situations where families were really, I won't say ripped apart, but rather just in fear of being ripped apart by these differing levels of concern and the way in which people express their concern. And this seems to have faded a little bit now, and that's perhaps because we are just more COVID aware. But certainly these issues about the way in which fear does create division and does create suddenly enemies. And so this was what was for me rather a disturbing or distressing element of my clinical work, was to recognize that people very quickly began to feel attacked, but then also to feel that they were made vulnerable by other people in their family who they couldn't understand why these things were happening. And I'll add that there isn't an easy resolution to this, and there rarely was in my clinical work, other than to recognize just, again, how that cloud of fear and doubt and worry created such dissension in so many situations that we were unfamiliar with up until this point. And that continues to be, I'll say, an issue, but I'll say less so than it was a year ago or even longer.
And just to add to that, Alan, I've seen it personally and in my practice as well, that fear that gets out of proportion allows us to be very judgmental. And when we're very judgmental, then there's really, it's very hard to talk something through. Like, oh, they're asking me to wear a mask. I don't want to have to wear a mask. Who are they? I've been triple vaxxed. I don't have to wear a mask. So it's that judgment that tends to come into a lot of conversations, that if people can be aware of that they can try to work through that.
Well, and some of it for me was starting to try and help people speak about the difference between want and need.
Okay.
Some things we want, some things we need. And I might want to have dinner with my family, but I might not need to have dinner with my family. Or I might want to go to a store, but I might not need to go to a store. Certainly in terms of some of the ways in which we have been gradually opening up, I'll just say for me, love watching the Leafs. I'm not yet ready to go to the arena. Right? And I'll just sort of say that these issues about ways in which people make different choices reflect both these issues of want and need. And for me, sometimes that was a helpful framework to provide for people, or to have people talk about, in terms of what do we need to do versus what do we want to do.
Okay, well, thank you. That's actually a good segue for the question that came in for Dr. Morris. And here it is. I have not had COVID. I am up to date on my vaccines and booster, and I'm not immune compromised. I'm planning to go to the Blue Jays game with my N95 mask. There will be approximately 50,000 people, and we'll be close together, and the roof will likely be closed. Am I taking a big risk?
So there's a few parts to that, right? So the first one is, where is the risk exposure? So in order to go to the game, you have to commute there somehow, right? So it all depends how you're commuting. And with this much COVID circulating, if you commute on a bus versus by a subway versus driving, those are all different. On top of that, you're likely going to be at some point in time indoors in relatively close crowded spaces going to the game. That's going to be your highest risk. N95s are very effective at protecting people. The reality is that most people who have N95s haven't been fit tested for them. And so the protection probably goes down a little bit. We don't know how much, but for the average person, it probably goes down somewhere around 5 to 10%. The KN94 and KN95s, the other products that don't have to be fit tested, they're close in quality, but they're not as effective as an N95. When you're at the game, if you're in a big stadium that's very well ventilated, and most stadiums are, there's a lot of air circulating there. The risk is actually really low, and you can tell there's been assessments done at the Scotiabank Arena, and which is considerably smaller than the Rogers Centre. And even there, the CO2 levels are relatively low, which means that there's probably a fair amount of fresh air coming in, and it's being well ventilated. It doesn't tell you how much virus is circulating, but it tells you that, you know, the CO2 that people breathe off is being ventilated out. That's, you know, so the risk can be substantially reduced by wearing good quality masks and keeping them on. Again, that's assuming that you're keeping on, especially in the areas where there's going to be a high concentration of people, and the space where you're in is relatively small, like close quarters, not the same. So it's like in the tunnels and in the concession areas in the Rogers Centre, but that's not the same as, you know, walking in other crowded areas, whether you're at Union Station or anything like that. But the other point I want to make out, and I'm trying to make this generalizable for not only this scenario, but for others, is that there are risks for getting infected and there are risks for getting very sick. Those are two very different things. It's going to be very difficult for people to continue on and increase socialization over the next, you know, probably 4 to 6 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, without having a high risk of exposure and getting infected. Just because there are so many people who are infected and many of those won't have symptoms, you're gonna have a fairly high likelihood of being exposed and possibly getting infected. If you get infected, we know that people, even if you're very well vaccinated, you're gonna have symptoms. People have had symptoms from respiratory illnesses for centuries, and that's not gonna change with COVID. But if you're otherwise healthy and you're well vaccinated, the likelihood of you getting severely unwell, acutely needing hospitalization, for example, is going to be really low. And for many people, that cost benefit, you know, I want to enjoy the life that I have right now rather than deferring it or delaying it for things that are unknown 6 months or 6 weeks, 6 months, or 6 years from now. That means a lot for a lot of people. So for some people, you know, making those decisions, whether it's participating at a Seder or going to a baseball game, what they value is going to be more than the risks of getting infected. Everything changes when you talk about the risk of severe illness, and I think that's where, for most people, the risk of severe illness is going to be low. But for people who are unboosted, older, have other health conditions, immunocompromised, that becomes a really tricky balance to tackle. And you know, I think people will have to make their you know, own decisions based on their personal risk assessments.
Okay, well, I think you've just answered. Oh, I see some penicillin there.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I meant to hit the mute and then I hit the stop video instead. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
Well, just before.
Yes, please go ahead.
Andrew, for some members of my family, I think the Blue Jays or the Leafs or Raptors might be a risk that they might be willing to take over coming to my Seder.
Yeah, and you know what? I would, if it were the Raptors, I'd probably take that risk.
There you go.
The Jays early in the season, uncertain. The Leafs will have to see how the goaltending and defense holds up.
Absolutely. We're used to loss, aren't we?
Exactly.
Personally, I'd rather go to the Seder.
All right. Well, okay. Well, Dr. Morris, you've answered the next question, so I'm going to move on to one more for you that just came in. I'm just going to read it from my phone here. Is the 4th vaccine advisable after having already 3 doses? Will it reduce the severity of illness more than it already has? Yeah. Sorry. That's
yeah. You know, the 4th dose is really there's a lot of uncertainty right now about it. Primarily because the data is early, right? And so, you know, we just saw New England Journal of Medicine just posted data out of Israel, you know, over the last 24 hours, which is probably our most up-to-date data, but it really only gives it for about 6 weeks after getting that 4th dose, and to demonstrate that things hold up after 6 weeks. I would say for most people who are have a relatively low risk of being unwell if infected, and their overall health and age makes them relatively low risk. The 4th dose is not going to be tremendously helpful. It may be a little bit helpful, but it's not going to be tremendously, because if your overall risk of hospitalization, for example, is, I'm going to say 1%, and if you can reduce that by another 20% or anything, you go from 1% to 0.8%. That's not much of a benefit. But if your risk of hospitalization because of illness and coexisting conditions and age, if your risk of hospitalization is like 5%, and it goes from 5% to 4%, a 1% drop is much more than a 0.2% drop, right? Like that, it doesn't seem like a lot, but it actually is a lot. And as your risk goes higher, there's some people whose risk of hospitalization is like 15 or 20%. So if you go from 20% to, let's say, 14, 15%, that's really substantial. So the benefit of those added doses, so of a 4th dose, is really going to be most important for people who are older and those with coexisting conditions. I would say that the risk is relatively low of getting them for side effects and stuff like that for most people. But if you're thinking about your kids or grandkids who are teenagers in their early 20s, they've probably already been infected on top of their initial doses. The benefit isn't going to be great, at least as far as we know, and we really just don't know. So it's quite early data. We may find out more in terms of its benefit over time. The advice I'm telling people is if you're at increased risk, based on what we know, get your 4th dose if you can. And we know that in Ontario, those are being opened up as of tomorrow for appointments. And if you're low risk, it's probably not going to hurt. But if you don't perceive yourself as, really wanting it, and you see yourself as having low risk, you're not doing anything wrong by waiting till we get more information.
I just want to add, if that's okay, something that you had talked about just previously, Andrew. You were talking about level of risk and what, as individuals, we value the most, what's important to us. Because what COVID has done is it's made us all isolated, whether we're seniors or adolescents, kids, whatever, any age group, everyone has experienced terrible isolation. And we know that we're social animals. Humans need other people. We need to be fed with other people. They give us self-confidence, fun, the whole thing. When we're isolated, and the reason why I want to talk about this is because it's it really does come to level of risk that you're prepared to take and what you value. Do you want to value another 6 months, for example, of not being physically present with other people? Because what we know about social isolation is that it creates sleeplessness, feelings of hopelessness, depression, anxiety. It impacts our nutrition. We might eat not enough or too much. For older people, it worsens their existing cognitive functioning. It even worsens their functional functioning. We're seeing more falls. Their health is worsening. So I think you really raised a good point, is that it really comes down to level of risk and what's important to me. So I like that, and I just kind of wanted to add that. There's no right answer.
No, I'm going to make one other point around that, because thanks for bringing that up. We're in a really interesting period of time right now, because some of the decisions we're making are because of, as I think you're appropriately pointing out, we need to make selfish decisions. because we need to take care of ourselves, and we need to be making decisions on behalf of ourselves for our own personal well-being. And I think that that's really important. I would also point out that many of the decisions, for example, that I make, I'm also making for societal or communal reasons, so that the fewer number of COVID cases around, the less the chance of someone who is immunocompromised is going to get infected. And it's a fine balance. So for things that don't make much of a difference to me, I wear a high quality mask when basically almost everywhere where I'm going indoors in Toronto. And I'm doing that not for me, but for other people. On the other hand, there are things that I may be doing or want to do for myself for selfish reasons. I will, because I think that's part of the reason why we're having this conversation. I will be having seders in my home. They're going to be smaller than previous. I'm going to be having, I usually host one large seder. I'm going to have 2 smaller seders. And I'll point out, because that was, Zoe mentioned this earlier, but I have 2 HEPA filters. Everyone's going to get a rapid test beforehand, and I've asked people to minimize their contact with people before coming over the several days prior to coming as well. All those things to reduce the risk. But after having missed 2, I've got a mother who, I'm not sure how many more seders she has, and it's important to her, as does my mother-in-law. It's going to be the same issue. So those are selfish reasons, informed so that everyone's informed, but it is a balance, right? And I think that, that's definitely been something that's been in the media a lot recently, is that, we've entered an era of sort of everyone for themselves. And, somebody who's been, heavily involved in the COVID response, I think it's really important that we take both a selfish perspective, but also a communal or societal perspective, and thinking about this at the same time.
So maybe I'll jump in if I can.
Yeah, those are all really important issues. Thank you.
And just maybe in terms of some ways that I've tried to frame some of this for my patients, and maybe in keeping with the sports metaphors that we've alluded to, I've been using a raw framework. And my raw is the first RA is reasonable anxiety. Reality is that it's both reasonable that we're anxious, and we also have to somehow maintain a reasonable level of anxiety. My second RAW has been to try and point out that what we're talking about is re-entry apprehension. As we all figure out, for me, how to come out of the basement at some point in time and to begin to interact. And yes, the Seder will, for my family as well, be a wonderful opportunity for people to see one another and hopefully to feel a little bit more of what we've been missing over the past couple of years. And my last RAW is really what we've been speaking about, which is risk assessment, and that everything on some level comes down to being able to evaluate what do we need, what do we want, how do we respond. And I'll say that probably is my parenthetical fourth RAW, which is respond appropriately. Recognize where you are, recognize what you need in order to be comfortable, in order to feel safe, and then in order to engage. And that seems to me to be part of what we're all looking for. Methods to manage what have been unmanageable situations. So I thought I would just offer that in response to the things we've already said.
I love that, Alan. I like that very much.
It's been very helpful.
Yeah. And there's a bit of humor in it. It kind of lightens it. It kind of makes the anxiety and the fear a little bit less because you laugh, right? So it's very nice. Very nice.
Oh, raw to all of your thoughts in the last few minutes. It's been very helpful, and you've managed to answer about 4 of the questions that came in over the last 20 minutes just in that one conversation. So that's fantastic, and we really appreciate that. So just picking up on what you were just talking about in terms of the anxiety, which was the part of the raw that you were just which are very raw feelings, anxiety. So one of the questions is, it's really for all three of you, is what are some of the better mental health strategies for dealing with fear and anxiety? And for you, Dr. Morris, your best advice for staying safe over the next few weeks. So let's start with Zoe. What are some strategies that you have for your clients regarding fear and anxiety? Is it very much about similar to what Alan was just talking about, or do you have other strategies for people who are elderly and have more health concern, anxiety, etc.?
Yeah.
Even social anxiety for having not seen anybody if they're in a residential home or elder care or something.
The most important thing, I love the rah. I would use that. I do use that, but I'm not using that acronym, but I use that approach. But also, I think, it's really important to allow yourself to recognize that you are nervous, that you do feel anxious about what it is that you want to do. Because if you don't allow yourself to fully feel it, then it's going to be really hard to take the next steps. So that's one thing that's one way in which I talk to my clients. The other thing is to ask yourself, okay, so get very specific. It's not good enough to say, I'm anxious to go to Loblaws. What is it that you're anxious about? See if you can break that anxiety down into manageable, concrete fears or worries. And that helps as well. And the third thing is, you want to be able to look at each of those areas that are causing you to feel anxious or whatever, or afraid. And then ask yourself, well, is this a fact? Is this a fact? Do I really need to be afraid of this? And you might find that you can rule out some of the pieces that are contributing to your anxiety by saying, well, no, I really don't need to worry about that. I worry about, that's something that I think about in another context, but not now. So you want to be able to become as specific as you can about your anxiety. And also, if it feels intolerable or unmanageable, then turn to family or friends or a counselor or a therapist for just a couple of sessions for help. Now, because what we do know about what COVID has done is that if people had pre-existing anxiety or depression or feelings of fear before COVID has just escalated it for many people. It's as though they've been thrown into an abyss, a black abyss. And so we need to be able to give strategies for people to be able to manage these very strong emotions. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Thank you. How about for your population, Alan?
Sure. And Zoe, I was going to say that many of the things that you were saying really resonate with my work as well.
Yeah.
We recognize, and some of my anxiety is a huge part of my practice, even prior to COVID, and certainly some of it emerging from working with people who have been traumatized. And part of what trauma focus, which relates to the anxiety that we've been experiencing during COVID as well, is that this is really a lot about our bodies. So I will have especially young people, but university students and adults that I see as well. I probably focus, I'll just say I focus extensively on what is this feeling, right? The body feeling, and how is that create and so sometimes perpetuate anxiety, because the reality is that containing anxiety is managing the moment. It's not solving the problem. In the moment, we are anxious. The problem may be far larger than what we can manage in one exchange or at one period in time. And so I'll often focus with people on how do they manage themselves now. And frequently that involves breathing, that involves being able to be aware of our circumstances, and yes, mindfulness and other techniques as well. The reality for me is, how can I help people calm? And that if they can calm, that will often then be possible to look at our thoughts, look at the distorted conclusions that we've created or the feelings that are unnecessary or incorrect even. And then how can we change those? So that notion of containing anxiety is about the moment. It also reflects the fact that, I'll say it this way, trying to solve the future in the present is an impossibility. And so those what if questions, how are we going to manage this? What happens if? What happens? These are unsolvable. They are unsolvable by definition, not by COVID. Right? Reality is, how do we manage these things? And sometimes we feel almost obligated and driven to try and create certainty. And the reality is that if one wants certainty, you're going to remain anxious. Right?
Okay, good point.
Yeah.
Finish on that note, since I had a good point.
Okay, lots of good points. Dr. Morris, so there is a lot of anxiety as we've been speaking about. So what are some practical suggestions? You know, you refer to maybe another 4 or 6 weeks of this wave before maybe things get better. What would be some suggestions from your perspective in encouraging people or suggesting people find ways of staying safe as possible?
Sure. So I think, certainly one of the best ways of staying safe is making sure that you're well vaccinated, right? And understanding what your own risk is. And, as I've said before, age is a really important factor. There's a variety of coexisting conditions that make people more at risk. And if you add them up, they certainly increase your likelihood of getting severely ill. And I think the truth is that most people who have those conditions are aware that it puts them at increased risk. That being said, many people, I'll say, it can be in denial of recognizing the risk, and it's important that they, take a sober look at understanding what their overall risk is. The next best thing, of course, is to use what we know about the transmission of disease to protect you. So we know that this is a virus that's transmitted in the air, and you breathe it in. And the best ways to reduce your likelihood of breathing it in are not being where there's a lot of people who may be infected. So being in a crowded area is probably not the best situation. Having air that is not diluted is not good. Whereas if you have very diluted air, like outdoors, I think is extremely protective. So if you are gathering with other people, being outdoors will give you a high likelihood of having fairly clean air. And then if you do have to be indoors, ensuring that the air that's indoors is as clean as possible that you breathe in. HEPA filters, open windows, those two things, or even in homes, having the recirculation fans going in your HVAC system, have it going not on auto but on, so that the fan is recirculating air constantly. These things will make a big difference. Obviously, if you're in a smaller home, small apartment, or condominium, the risk is going to be different, but you can still have your system or have your HVAC system running. And then lastly, protecting what goes in through your mouth with high quality masks. An N95 is best. The KN94, KN95, FN94s are very, very good and pretty close to that. Surgical quality masks are actually very good, and there are ways to make those better. Certainly wearing two, one on top of the other, can make a really big difference. And for most people, the difference between two surgical masks versus an N95, it's not that large a difference. There is a difference, but it's not that large. Cloth masks, I keep on telling people that they're really not really seen as worthwhile, especially when we've got a very highly transmitted virus. So, I think those are, avoiding indoors with lots of people, wearing a mask, and ensuring that the air wherever you are, the air is as fresh and clean as possible is going to make the biggest difference. The one last point I'm going to make is there is a time factor here. So whatever you do over the next few weeks is going to be higher risk than what you're going to be doing several weeks down the road. And so, and that's just because there is more COVID circulating. I don't think we've peaked yet. So the risk today is going to be a little different than the week, let's say 5 days from now, because I think we're still going to continue to see a rise for at least the next 5 to 7 days. We'll have to see how long it takes for us to get to the peak. And there'll still be a pretty high risk over the next several weeks. And to be honest, it's uncertain what will happen thereafter. But it will probably be several weeks. So if there are things that you can do that you can defer, obviously some things like a Seder you can't, but there are other things that you can, then by all means consider deferring them, right? Because we have a risk budget also, right? And so everyone sort of, the more risk you take now, the higher your chances of getting infected. And you're not going to make a right or wrong decision because it's very personal. But if there are things that are lower priority, that you can defer, that's going to lower your risk. The other thing I'd lastly to point out, which I mentioned regarding Seder plans, is rapid tests are helpful. They're not perfect. 2 is better than 1. So a test today and tomorrow would tell me that if someone has 2 negative rapid tests, the risk of infecting me or exposing me is going to be relatively low. It's not 0, but when the cases are so high, the benefit actually goes up, right? When there's very few cases of COVID circulating, rapid tests actually aren't that beneficial, because even if without the test, the risk of getting infected is low. But as you see the number of cases rise, the rapid tests, the value does go up, and they're not perfect. I think most people know now that you should be swabbing your cheeks inside of your mouth and the cheeks on both sides, the back of your throat, and then both nostrils as deeply as possible before performing the rapid test, just because of how Omicron infects people. I'll stop there.
Could I just ask you a question? It is one of the reasons why the numbers are going crazy because the government lifted mandatory masks in public spaces. Is that a contributing factor?
I think there's an interplay. So the interplay is we've reduced the testing dramatically. On top of that, the government isn't releasing. So because of that, we don't have accurate numbers. And there aren't daily formal announcements of the numbers either. That reduces the conversation. It's not on the news every day, for example. On top of that, we do have the removal of the mask mandates. And the perception of the average person is there's nothing for me to worry about, or I'm not forced to worry about it. And there's a combination of those things. And what that has really meant is that there's just more social interaction that's unmasked.
Yeah.
And people are doing it because they're not worried, it's not top of mind, and they aren't forced to, and there aren't requirements. All those things combined means that there's just more unmasked social interaction. And then we've got this BA2 variant, which of Omicron, or subvariant of Omicron, which is just incredibly contagious. And all of those things put together makes it a perfect storm to see the wave that we're experiencing right now. And as I said, it is going to get a little bit worse.
A question just came in asking you, Dr. Morris, if you could just repeat what you said about the rapid testing. Like when families are getting together, you were saying to do it one day before and 2 days before.
Well, I'd actually suggest a day before and the day of is what I would do.
Oh, okay, the day before and the day of. And if you could just, somebody wants to know, can you just repeat the areas that should be swabbed?
Yeah, so but the back of the throat at the top and on both sides, you can like swab the cheeks or just towards the back of the cheeks, but the back of the throat on the sides and on the top, you swab those 3 areas and then each nostril, right? And ideally, like the front of the nose isn't a great site. It won't give you as much of a yield, but if you can just go a little bit deeper. And people forget that the way the nose goes, the cotton swab should go straight. It shouldn't go like down or up, but it just goes straight in. And you know, when it just starts to become a little bit uncomfortable, you know, twirl the testing swab, you know, 4 or 5 times and do it in each nostril.
Okay, well, we've really covered a lot of ground, and we're starting to get close to the end of our evening. So one more question is, or a couple more questions is, what, you know, as we're beginning to navigate all of this, and hopefully, as you say, in a few weeks, maybe, you know, things will you know, decline, and perhaps we won't be surrounded by quite as much COVID. But what supports going forward should we have in place to successfully manage future waves? Are there things that we should be thinking about from a science point of view, from an elderly senior point of view, for adolescents? I mean, do you have some thoughts about that so that we can maybe learn from what we've from the last 2 years? Alan?
Well, I think going forward, we're also going to have to manage the consequences of what's happened to us over these past couple of years. And in particular, I think that's probably going to show itself in education, in terms of the fact that people won't have, or our students, at least our children, won't have made the same progress as we might have expected. And certainly this is also clear that there are disparities within our city, certainly within the province as well, where there will be more marked discrepancies between expectations and actual achievement levels. And I do think that this is a problem that that all systems of all levels of government and certain systems within our education system will need to address. What's also happened as a result of this is we're having a talk about mental health, and this is commonplace. And where in the past the notion of stigma and the concern about seeing a therapist was recognized or felt to be in some ways a sign of weakness or in some sort of deficit, and I think that's changed. I think it was changing. I think it has changed dramatically as a result of COVID, and I think that's only a good thing for our community. And perhaps that's another piece of this which we need to be even more prepared for should we encounter other health concerns that are as pervasive and difficult as COVID has been. Reality was we weren't prepared for this, and while we've responded, and people have responded in incredible ways to try and help friends, help family, and help strangers, we do need to be more prepared. I don't know that I have a list of things to do other than to acknowledge the fact that we need to be far more aware of the impact of as Zoe says, in terms of isolation and these the cost of these on our community. So I think that's what we will need to be looking forward to, unfortunately, should we encounter these kinds of challenges again.
Okay, thank you. And Zoe?
Yeah, I'll just give you an example. I facilitate a seniors group, and I started doing this in when COVID started for the JCC. And one of the women in the group recently moved into a retirement home. And we had a group today, and she said what's making her anxious is that in the retirement home, people don't have to be masks. masked anymore in public spaces. So I think that that's wrong. There should be, the government needs to be more, and the government needs to be more involved, in my opinion, to help lower increased infection rate and decrease anxiety by being more forceful in terms of in masking in public spaces, especially in spaces, in areas where the elderly reside. I mean, to me, it brings me to tears that's happening at her institution, and I think that that's going to continue to happen in these retirement homes. So that's one example. I just really think that the government needs to be more proactive. We also need more money in community support services. We've spent a lot of time during COVID to talk about institutional care and all of the deficits in institutional care, but we haven't really talked very much about people living at home. People want to continue to live at home. They don't want to move into institutions. The government's going to be, the current government has just said that they're going to be building, I think, something like 30,000 new beds in the next couple of years. It's not what seniors want. I think that, if we can change that focus to providing care, safe care during COVID in people's homes, that will decrease anxiety. It will help to decrease isolation. People want to age at home. So I personally feel that the government needs to take more responsibility to be able to do that.
And finally, Dr. Morris.
A few thoughts. One is, as I've tried to emphasize, this is a disease that's transmitted in an airborne manner. And I think if we could actually dissuade people from worrying about the things that aren't involved in COVID transmission. Businesses are obsessed with, cleaning surfaces, wiping surfaces, using these kind of barriers because of how we initially thought it was transmitted. It's physically and emotionally taxing, and it's costly with low value. It also prevents people from really understanding how the disease is transmitted. The second thing is that because we do know how it's transmitted now, it's very clear that doing things that ensure that air is clean will make a big difference. There was a time, centuries ago when, sewage water was basically used, like the sanitation of water was so poor that people were getting sick from washing food with dirty water. We still have that actually in some countries. But ensuring that water was clean and safe made a real big difference to get rid of a lot of foodborne diseases and diseases that are transmitted from touching, eating, and drinking. But COVID, I think, has amplified what we understand about diseases that are transmitted through the air, which used to be a worry centuries ago, but it as well, but faded away, and obviously with COVID has made a resurgence. And so I think the government paying attention to that with regulations, requirements, and educating the public, and almost certainly recognizing that there will be times when things like masking and perhaps even having capacity restrictions, during peaks will make a difference, I think is going to be really important. I would say, though, that is all bundled into what I pointed out very early on, which is the issue of information and misinformation. Right now, we're seeing a government in Ontario that is largely failing to communicate for political reasons, which I understand. But it typifies the deficit of communication that has gone on for a couple of years. And the truth is that most Western governments have been rather poor at communicating all aspects of the disease to their public. And the ones that were very well set up and prepared, especially a lot of Asian countries, as well as the Pacific countries like Australia and New Zealand, performed substantially better. And, you know, I think governments would be wise to put a lot more emphasis on communicating to the public with reliable, accessible, easy to understand, sometimes fun information, and worry less about some of the things that are probably of low value to the public. So I think moving forward, focusing on air and focusing on useful communication to the public is going to be really important.
Okay, well, those are, I hope lots of people are listening to this, especially the powers that be, because those are all very, very important thoughts. And again, as Alan said, we hope we're not going to move into another period of COVID, but let's see the end of this one and no more. But we do have to learn from what we've been given. So just, I was going to circle back and ask each of you, given the topic of our conversation tonight, what your Seder was going to look like this year, and if you're coming to Seder, given the title. But Andrew's already answered that question, and so has Alan. So I guess, Zoe, I'm going to just ask you before we wrap it up.
So we'll just have a very small Seder, not a big one like usual, but it'll just be immediate family. So it'll be a small grouping, and we will ask, everyone needs to be rapid tested. Thank you, Andrew, for saying the day before and the day out, because I would have thought it would have been 2 days before. So I've learned from you. Thank you. We'll do that, and we'll be well spaced, and I think that we might wear jackets and have the doors and windows.
Okay.
We'll figure that out.
And just one other thing I'd point out. If you can, make sure that Eliyahu also does a rabbit test before he visits.
Thanks for that.
Well, that's a wonderful way for us to start to wrap up the evening. And unfortunately, the clock is also telling us that it's time to wrap up the evening. So first, I just want to start by thanking each of you for your incredible wisdom and your clarity and your reassurance and your very sage advice. We are clearly now navigating a newer normal, and clearly we have to consider what we've learned and what we can improve upon. Some of those things you've highlighted. It's also clear that moving forward will still present us with some challenges as we learn to weigh the difference between what is true danger and what is reasonable risk. Also. But you've given us some good information and tools to use as we face those challenges. And I think what's also really clear from our conversation is that we also ultimately have to be responsible for our own behavior, and at the same time being respectful for the decisions that individuals or families make. So we didn't have time to get to all of the questions, but you all three of you had a way of just answering a question just before it came in. So it really made things a lot easier for me. So thank you. We did cover quite a lot of territory. So on behalf of Luke Sklar Mental Health Initiative and Holy Blossom Temple, we want to thank you, Alan Bardikoff, Andrew Morris, and Zoe Levitt for your time tonight. And we want to thank all of you who have joined us this evening. We hope that you've gleaned much from this discussion, and do look forward to tomorrow's resources being sent to you. And please do fill out the survey. And we hope that you'll join us again for our next program on May the 9th. So again, shalom to all of you, Lahitraot, and Chag Pesach Sameach. Rabbi, did you want to add anything more before we say goodnight?
I wanted to send my gratitude to you as well, Pam. Thank you for leading us.
My pleasure.
And thank you to everyone here. I think we should mention, if you're still on the fence about what your Seder plans look like, please know that there is a virtual option. The last 2 years, we've had a very large virtual option with 200, 300 plus folks on screen. But this year, Holy Blossom is holding an intimate first night virtual Seder, and registration information and details can be found on the Holy Blossom website. And as well, that May 9th. So we hope you'll mark your calendars for Monday, May 9th, a conversation entitled "One Suicide is Too Many, Changing the Conversation to Save Lives." Again, registration details can be found on the Holy Blossom website. So really, that's it. Thank you, everyone, for your participation, and thank you to our panelists for bringing your expertise and your time. We really appreciate you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks, Pam.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.